Hello everyone, it's Karina with Karina Loves to Plan. Welcome back to my channel, and I'm here for the third and final installment of the June 30 Inks 30 Days. Here is the completed grid, and I love when the grid is all completed like this. It's really satisfying to see it all done up like this. So for 30 Inks 30 Days, what I have been doing is I will be doing a half-day spread such as this for each day. I do a circle, a little writing sample comparison on Rhodia and Regalia paper, and a little Zentangle. I also will be doing a journal entry in my A5 Sterling ink common planner with a little sandwich bag ink swatch. So I will show you little bits and pieces of all of that today, and then I will do a flip through of all of days 1 through 30 at the end of this video. Let's get started. Day 21, and we have Mon Verde Moonstone, which was recommended to me by a viewer during my Brown Inks video, and this is in my TWSBI Eco Cafe Bronze. So I will do a quick swatch here in the grid with my Speedball B nib, and then just quickly write the name of the ink. And then I will do my sandwich baggy ink swatch in my Sterling Ink A5 common planner in the daily pages. It's made it really easy to decorate this month, knowing that each ink will have its own dedicated page in my journal. Then I will do a circle swatch in my Galen leather journal, and then do a quick writing sample, and then compare it on the Regalia paper and the Rhodia paper. And I do notice that on the Regalia paper, the ink looks a little bit lighter and a little grayer almost, whereas on the Rhodia paper you can see the brown shading come up here. And this is a really beautiful ink, and you can see how lovely it looks in this Zentangle doodle that I love doing here. And actually this ink and pen combination so far is absolutely lovely. The extra fine nib in the TWSBI Eco Cafe Bronze still brings out a lovely shading in this pen. I loved the way this pen and ink wrote together. The extra fine nib is crisp and smooth and wet, and the ink is a lovely shade of brown, and shading is actually really prevalent even in an extra fine nib. Lovely. I absolutely loved these two together, and I thought maybe it's not an exact match, but the extra fine nib actually performed really well with this ink. And I might keep this inked up just to be able to use whatever is left in this pen. So that is Mon Verde Moonstone in my TWSBI Eco Cafe Bronze. Day 22, and we have Diamine Rainbows, and in my Leonardo Furore Aqua Petra, and this has a fine nib, and this purple is stunning. I love the way this goes down on my 30 days grid, and that pinky purple shimmer is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Now I'm going to do a sandwich bag swatch in my journal, and I love this method because it really produces a great way of seeing the ink's properties like shading and sheening, and it's just such a fun way to decorate a journaling spread. And then I'm going to do some circles in my Galen leather A5 notebook, a quick writing sample, as well as a comparison to the Regalia and the Rhodia paper. The Regalia paper seems to not show off as much shading, or even the sheet, or well, what am I saying? The glitter shimmer, gosh. But the Rhodia paper is looking very, very similar to what's on the Tomoe River paper, although the Tomoe River paper does show off a bit more sheen. And then I'll do a quick Zentangle here. This was such a joy to use. The ink and pen combination were very smooth, no hard starts, and the shimmer in here was actually quite consistent. This is a stunning purple ink with just the right amount of shimmer. The fine nib in this is the perfect wetness to show the shimmer. I plan to keep it inked for the month of July because I like it that much. So there's the finished Zentangle with my pen here. I really like Rainbows End. I think it's such a fun ink, and it may not have necessarily been the exact match for Aqua Petra, but this is a great pen for shimmers, and it's such a smooth, fine nib, but it's also just pretty to look at. So that is day 22 with Diamine Rainbows End. Day 23, and we have Sailor Ink Studio 273 in my Silver Burl Strata Quartz, and this pen has an extra fine nib, and I'm so thankful to whoever recommended this ink because I absolutely love it. It looks amazing swatched on my 30 days grid, and then I'm going to go do a sandwich bag swatch in my Sterling Ink A5 Common Planner, and I love the way that this chromo shades. And then I'm going to do a few circle swatches in my Galen leather notebook, and then swatch it as well on the Regalia paper and the Rhodia paper. Now, the properties of this ink don't really show well on the Regalia paper or the Rhodia paper, and I know a few of you have said that the Regalia paper I may have received may be one of their faulty batches, which is unfortunate. I mean, even when I write on it, it can bleed through a little bit, but on the Rhodia it just even looks different. The darker area looks more brown than it does pink. And so here is a quick look at a Zentangle that I'm doing. The flow of this pen and ink combination was lovely, even with an extra fine nib. I really loved how wet the Sailor ink was, and you could still see some of the shading properties. Not too much of the chromo shading like you can see in the circles, but it's definitely beautiful to look at. This was an amazing pen and ink pairing. I mean, without the chromo shading and you just get the brown, it is a perfect match. I will definitely be keeping this inked in July. I am so grateful to who recommended this particular ink to me because I absolutely love it. Do I need a bottle of it? No. But I'm very tempted by a bottle of this in the future. And I think, I'm just looking at my sample of what's left, there's just that tiny bit left of that 2 ml sample from Goulet Pens, which I'm sure can get me through another inking of this pen. All right, so that is day 23 with Sailor Ink Studio 273 in my Silver Burl Strata Quartz. Day 24, and we have another Diamine ink, Diamine Harmony, and this time it is in my Esterbrook SD Lilac, and this has an extra fine nib as well. So I'm going to do a quick swatch with my Speedball B nib in my 30 inks 30 days grid, and then I'm going to do a sandwich baggy swatch in my Sterling Ink A5 Common Planner. I haven't had much time in the last month to really do some extra transcribing, and that's why I'm actually choosing a few pens to move ahead into July to keep them inked and to keep exploring them. So once I've done the sandwich baggy swatch, then I'm going to do a few circles in my Galen leather notebook, and then also do swatches on the Regalia paper and the Rhodia paper. It's interesting to me how the Regalia paper, it does look a bit fibrous, like the ink is just sitting on top of the paper, and it even makes the shading look different, whereas the Rhodia paper does look a bit similar to the Tomoy River paper. And on the Tomoy River paper, it looks like there's a little bit of a pink undertone to this ink, which I love. Then a quick look at a Zentangle. These are so fun to do, and a lot of my inspiration just comes from Instagram. I'll include a link to the profile that I follow down in the description below, and it's such a great way to use the pen and ink combination. This is a lovely pairing. I feel like they're a perfect match. There were no issues at all with flow out of the extra fine nib, and I still got great shading. I'm going to want to explore this further, but maybe not in the month of July. So there is my Esterbrook SD. I think the lovely chromo shading that you're going to get, because you see a lot of the pink undertones do match the pen really well. I actually love this pen. It's so pretty, and this is a really beautiful purple ink to go with it. I do have a love for purple inks, actually, like purple and brown and pink, like who knew. I'm really happy with how that Zentangle turned out. It was such a fun way to use the extra fine nib. Sometimes I wonder if I should do more detailed Zentangles, but even these were just great fun to do. So So that is day 24 with Diamine Harmony in my Esterbrook ST Lilac. Day 25, and we have an ink that was sent to me by Pennonia Lights of Niagara, and this is in my Just Turnings Pastel Primary Manipulation, and this has an extra fine architect nib. I think this ink is stunning. You see here in the quick swatch on my 30 inks grid with my Speedball B nib, it's wow, just in your face. And then when you see it on the sandwich bag swatches, once it dries, it has this really pretty blue shimmer, and it still has such wonderful shading. And then I'm going to do the circles in my Galen leather notebook along with the comparison on the Rhodia and Regalia paper. And actually with this extra fine architect nib, it flowed really well. There were no issues, and it still showed off the shimmer really, really well. Now that I look at it a bit more, it's more of a blurple rather than a blue. So like a lighter purple, light blue mixed together. And then it's got that light blue shimmer. I really, really like this. I think it's stunning. So here's a quick look at a Zentangle that I'm going to do. This one was an easier one. Some are really, really difficult, and some days I just want something easy to do. And this one was really great for relaxing the mind. This is such a fun ink, and I am so glad that I put this in an extra fine architect nib. There were no hard starts or clogging, but the shimmer could be a little bit more consistent. I will definitely keep this inked for July. So there is the finished Zentangle. I really love the way it looks, although you don't get as much shimmer in here. Like maybe there's certain areas that you know what? I'm going to bring that a little closer so you can see the shimmer. And I'm not sure if the camera is showing that. But yeah, you do get some parts of the shimmer there. It's a really, really beautiful ink, and I am going to definitely keep it inked up for July. So that is day 25, Pennonia Lights of Niagara in my Just Turnings Pastel Primary Manipulation. Day 26, and we have, gosh, I have quite a few Diamines in this one. Diamine Raise a Glass, and this was from, I believe, Inkvent 2022. Please correct me if I got that wrong. And I've put this in my Pens by Casey Tokubetsu, and it's got an opal inlay with the casein finials and grip. And this also has a fine cypress nib. So I've done the swatch in my 30 inks grid as well as the sandwich baggy swatch. This ink has quite a lot of sheen, and I wish I could have seen more of the shimmer rather than just the sheen. It's a beautiful base, as you can see here, and I'm going to do a few circle swatches in my Galen leather notebook as well. But you can see the sheen isn't as prominent in the circle swatches, but you can definitely see it in the writing sample and on the Regalia paper. The Regalia paper performed really well with this ink, and so did the Rhodia. The Rhodia showed off more of the shimmer, but it could have been the way that I did the sample. And then here is a quick look at the Zentangle that I've done. This was a fun Zentangle to do, but I just found the ink it felt like it was more sheen than shimmer, and even when the ink has dried, all I see is that sheen, which is unfortunate because the combination of the sheen and shimmer and the base color together is beautiful, but it just didn't come off as it should have. A lot of potential for this ink, but since actually this particular pen doesn't seal very well, the initial writing sample can look very, very saturated, so you don't really see the effects of the ink as much as I would have liked to. So it's not an ink that I will be keeping, unfortunately. So that is day 26, Diamine Raise a Glass in my Pens by Casey Tokubetsu with the opal inlay. I think it was a great match, but it just wasn't the ink for me, unfortunately. Day 27, and oh gosh, another Diamine ink. We have Diamine Autumn Oak, and this is in my Esterbrook SD in the honeycomb with a needlepoint nib. And wow, Look at the way that this ink goes down on my 30 inks grid and the way that it's going to go down in the sandwich bag swatch in my Sterling Ink Common Planner. It is fun, and the amount of shading in this ink is fantastic. And then doing the circle swatches in my Galen leather notebook. I love writing with this pen because it's slicey and smooth, and this ink is wet enough to handle that. Now on the Regalia paper, it does look a little lighter than it does on the Rhodia paper, on the Tomoy River paper. And maybe it's just the way that I put the ink down on the Rhodia paper, but you don't see as much shading, but there is a lot of shading on the Tomoy River paper. And then we'll go ahead and do a Zentangle here. This one, I feel like I wish I had done this slightly smaller, but because of the grid sizes of my stencil, I guess, or my grid layout on the background, it wasn't as small as I could have made it, but this was still a fun one to do. I am normally very picky about the types of inks that go in this pen, particularly because of the needlepoint nib, but Autumn Oak is a great match. It flows really well out of this needlepoint nib, and the color is just so lovely. So there is the finished Zentangle, and yeah, you could see what I mean about it could have been, I guess, a little smaller or a smaller grid size, especially with the needlepoint nib, but I'm really happy with how that turned out, and this was such a great experience. Knowing that I can use the Diamine inks in the needlepoint nib makes a huge difference to the types of inks that I can use, because it flowed well, and look at how well that matches. I think that's the great match. So that's day 27 Diamine Autumn Oak in my Esterbrook SD Honeycomb. Day 28, and we have Rohrer and Klingner Deep Pine, and this is in my Pelikan M800 green black with an extra fine nib. And I believe this ink was the special edition or limited edition. I got this as a sample from a friend ages ago, and I'm just using it now. So once I've done the swatch on my 30 inks grid, I'm going to go ahead and do the sandwich bag swatch in my A5 Common Planner, and this was a fun pen and ink combination to write with. I'll do these circle swatches in my Galen leather notebook. You don't see a ton of shading in those circle swatches, but you do see shading, funny enough, in the Regalia paper. The base color looks a lot lighter on the Regalia paper than it does on the Rhodia or the Tomoy River paper. And then I'll do a little bit of a demonstration of the Zentangle. This one was a fun one, especially with this combination. It was a very wet combination. You don't see a ton of shading in the Zentangle, but it was still so fun to use. This was a very wet pen and ink pairing. It does shade a bit, and I wonder how this ink would have done in a finer nib or even in a needlepoint nib. Unfortunately, I finished the sample, so I will keep this pen inked until it runs out. So there is the finished Zentangle. You see a little bit of shading, but not a ton of it. And I think it's because this pen is just so wet that the ink is kind of gushing out of it. So I really wonder what it would have been like with a finer nib. And, you know, even in this size nib, if it was just a little bit drier, what it would have been like with the different shading. But I mean, you don't see a lot of shading in the circle swatches either. So that is Rohrer and Klingner Deep Pine in my Pelikan M800 with an extra fine nib. Day 29, and we have another ink that was sent to me by my friend S. It is Birmingham Penco Neutron Star, and I've decided to put it in my Zodiac Penco Abalone, and this has an extra fine nib. Now you're thinking, extra fine nib and shimmer, how do you do it? Really, I don't know. I just use it. And it works out well for me. So I've done the swatch with my Speedball B nib in my 30 inks grid, and then I'm going to do my sandwich baggie. This was so fun and lovely in my sandwich bag swatch, because you can't predict where the ink is going to go with the sandwich baggie. It just does its thing, and it's so fun, the results. Then I'm gonna do the circle swatches in my Galen leather notebook, and once this dries, you'll see how the shimmer basically just takes over. This is a beautiful ink with a lovely blue base, and then it's got a red sheen and this kind of silvery blue shimmer. So fun. I think if it didn't have that silvery blue shimmer, it wouldn't necessarily be an ink for me, because red sheen can really make me dizzy or give me a headache while I'm writing, but this one was lovely. And you can see actually the difference between the Regalia and the Rhodia paper. It looks a little bit fibrous on the Regalia paper, whereas the Rhodia paper really shows off that shading. And then I start my Zentangle here. I actually think that having this in an extra fine nib kind of lessens the impact of the sheen and does lessen a little bit of the shimmer, but it's still so fun in this combination. Not the most exact match, but so fun to use. The extra fine nib actually, I think, was good for this ink because it lessened the impact of the sheen, but it still put out enough shimmer to make it really fun. I will definitely keep this inked and explore more in July. So there is the finished Zentangle. I want to actually bring that up closer to the camera here so you can see, look at that sheen that's coming off, but you could also see some of the shimmer, like there in that exact shot. You could see some of the shimmer in those areas. It's really fun ink, and I'm so glad that I actually put it in an extra fine nib so that the sheen isn't just so overpowering. So that is day 29 with Birmingham Penco Neutron Star in my Zodiac Penco Abalone. And last but not least, day 30. We got to day 30, so thank you all for sticking with me through all of this. Day 30, we have Octopus Fluids Violet Raccoon, and this is the Write and Draw ink. And I put this in my Atelier Lusso Hepalua, which has a fine Yovo steel nib. This is such a pretty pinky purple ink. Reminds me of Sailor Shikiori Yozakura. And once I've done the swatch in my 30 inks grid, then I'll go ahead and put a swatch in my Sterling Ink A5 Common Planner, the last daily spread in this book one of my Common Planner. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a circle swatch on the Tomoe River paper, and then go ahead and compare it on the Regalia and Rhodia. It is interesting that there is no shading that's coming up on the Rhodia paper, and then on the Regalia paper it kind of just sits on the top. Like when I do an extra coating or layer, it sits there on the top like it hasn't soaked into the paper yet, which is really interesting. And then I will do a little bit of a Zentangle. This one was fun because you could see the shading even with a fine nib, and it flowed really well out of this pen. This ink is quite fun. I have not yet painted with it, but the doodle turned out beautifully. This ink shades actually quite well and has a good flow even in the fine nib. I will definitely keep exploring this ink. So there is the finished Zentangle. I really like the way it looks, but you can see here actually on the Regalia paper how it kind of created that weird film on the top. So I don't know if that's just the Regalia paper, the Regalia paper, or if it was the ink itself, but it really turned out nicely on the Tomoe River paper and looked a little bit fibrous on the Rhodia paper, which is interesting to see, but definitely a beautiful ink and one I will keep exploring. So that is day 30 with Octopus Fluids Violet Raccoon with my Atelier Lusso Hepalua. So there is the full grid, and I again love how that looks. You can really get an idea of what the ink looks like once swatched, but obviously it's not the same as a writing sample. Sorry, there's a hair. Whew, there's a hair. But you still, I love this because it looks like a piece of art to me, this grid. So then we have day 1 and 2. Oops. Day 3 and 4. 5 and 6. I love Diamine Bah Humbug. I'm going to keep that inked. Day 7 and 8. 9, and 10. I'm definitely going to keep Van Diemen's August inked, and I'm still thinking about whether to keep Sugar Snap inked for July. Oh, and a few things here. Here we go. Then we have day 11. I am definitely keeping Warringal Persephone inked in my Franklin Christoph. That's going to be used as my A6 5-year journal pen and ink combination for the month of July. Then day 13 and day 14, I really, really like this ink, and I'm going to keep that inked for July as well. Then day 15 and day 16, I love Le Bon Aphrodite, but I need to spread the love a little bit. Then we have day 17 and day 18. I do want to keep Diamine Tranquility inked because it's so pretty. And Ancient Copper, lovely combination. Then day 19 and day 20. Day 21 and day 22. 23 and 24. 25, 26. 27 and 28. And 29 and 30. So that is it for this iteration of 30 inks, 30 days. Thank you for sticking with me. Do you like this format? If you do, please let me know down in the comments below. Or if there's anything that I've missed that you'd want me to look at in the future, please let me know as well. Thank you all so much for watching. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Once again, thank you so much and have yourselves a great day.